Nicolas Maduro, he is responding to an ultimatum from 4 European countries and a statement from the EU. The Venezuelan president says he will not bow to demands to call fresh elections, and he called the current political crisis a U.S.-led coup. Opposition leader Juan Guaido declared himself interim president last week amid massive anti-government protests, and the move was supported by several world leaders, including Donald Trump. The UK, Germany, France, and Spain then issued an ultimatum saying that Maduro must call elections within 8 days or they will recognize Guaido's claim to the presidency. Meanwhile, the EU issued its own statement, which was read aloud at the UN by the British Minister of State for Europe and the Americas. Let's take a look at this.
The EU strongly calls for the urgent holding of free, transparent and credible presidential elections in accordance with internationally democratic standards and the Venezuelan constitutional order. In the absence of an announcement on the organization of fresh elections with the necessary guarantees over the next days, the EU will take further actions, including on the issue of recognition of the country's leadership in line with Article 233 of the Venezuelan Constitution.
All right, joining us now in the studio to discuss this is Ana Gomes, a Portuguese MEP with the SND Group. Also joining us for this panel is Mark Demismaker, a Belgian MEP with the ECR Group. And still with us is Brian McGuire, journalist and broadcaster from Euractiv. All right, let's talk about the EU's reaction. And I'll start with you. Does the EU's reaction have any teeth at all, have any clout at all?
I think it does. It also shows we're not in regime change for the sake of regime change. That is something that the Venezuelan people, it's up to them, and they are actually saying that they need it. But it does because it gives indeed this opportunity for elections to be announced. But of course it has to be credible elections organized by the UN under international supervision, not a la Maduro elections that lead to this crisis and that show they are the reason why we can't recognize the legitimacy of Maduro as president.
All right. I mean, it is, you know, they did make a statement, but don't you feel like, I'll ask you this, Mark, don't you feel like it's a bit lukewarm, this response from the EU? Because we know that 4 European countries were calling strongly for this, but we had other countries, Austria, Greece, Italy, who did not actually want this. So how can the EU be taken seriously when they can't even agree on what foreign policy to pursue?
Well, it shows, indeed, it shows how divided the EU is on this matter again, with some member states issuing other statements. Now, the statement of the EU in itself, I think it was wise.
Okay.
I don't think it's wise to put an ultimatum right away if you want to solve this in a diplomatic way.
So you're okay
but
that
ultimately,
it's softer?
yes,
okay.
and ultimately, yes, and elections will have to be held because power has to be legitimized.
Yeah.
But the calls, the ultimatum, so to say, has been established not by the EU itself, but by a few member states who have more at stake there. In my own country, Portugal, we have about 500,000 binationals, Portuguese Venezuelans, are also backing that position. Of course, we cannot overlook the overall context where other countries, not just the US, Canada, a lot of other Latin American countries also took a very clear position. And it's about indeed recognizing who is legitimate and then, of course, also providing the means for that legitimacy to be translated. One crucial thing will be this possibility that the money that the US is paying to Venezuela and that has been sustaining Maduro will actually be diverted to Guaido.
Okay.
This is critical. If Maduro's all about the money, it's a mafia state.
Sure.
And if they don't get this, what can Europe do in the end? Because we have to issue another declaration to say, hold your elections, and then what? Another declaration say, hold your elections. We have to have some teeth in this game, and that's nowhere in sight yet. So lining up these other nations, the 3 which are outstanding at the moment, Europe has been led essentially by Sanchez at the moment, above Spain, and they've got to get a real game plan. It's going to take months, if not years, to land this, and probably not softly either.
Okay, well, we were talking about, funding, and I think this is a very important topic to touch on because the EU has given aid to Venezuela for more than 2 decades now. Here's a look at just how much money the bloc has sent. Now, for Venezuela's migration crisis, the EU sent 35 million euros in June and announced last month that they would send another 20 million. 40 million was allocated between 2007 and 2013 for modernization and diversification of its economy. 63.8 million was earmarked between 2000 and 2006 for technical financial cooperation as well as reconstruction. So there you see the EU's contribution to the Venezuelan economy. And there is this,
it's tiny.
It is tiny, but if you look at the EU's role, I'm just looking at the EU's role in global policy, it's usually a payer rather than a player. This has been quoted before.
But in the case of Venezuela, it's somewhat different because of the importance of our own European communities in Venezuela. I mentioned the Portuguese, the Spaniard, of course, the Italian, and so on. And I think the position of the EU is very important at this moment to indeed make the minds concentrate, and namely the minds of the military in Venezuela concentrate, because that's what is going to decide what's going to happen in Venezuela by the people of Venezuela. And probably the top levels of the Venezuelan army, who are mostly narco-traffickers, are, of course, continuing to be aligned with Maduro. But Guaido needs to ensure, indeed, the support of the other levels, and that's what will be determined.
And we've already seen mutiny as well. The military and the police forces have both demonstrated...
There are signs of mutiny.
Yeah, and not small mutinies. The whole squads in certain areas have been shown their clear opposition and willing to go to prison in opposition to Maduro.
And what I've been told is that actually Maduro now is putting military squads, special forces, to go after the neighborhoods collectives who earlier were supporting him and now have turned for
and don't forget
Guaido.
the possible meddling of Russia and Russian mercenaries.
That's another ball game, and it's there, of course, because it's the standoff between Russia and the US.
We're talking about, you're saying that the EU is interested in Venezuela because of the citizens living there, and the money that you're talking about is small compared to what other countries would be giving in. But I would like to ask the criticism of the EU, where it always just follows the lead of the United States. Do you think it's valid in this case? Okay, no. Ahmed doesn't agree, but what do you think?
No, because, well, Trump was the first to recognize the opposition leader immediately. Now, for me, it is also not clear what strategy he has.
No.
Because what if Maduro just stays in power? What will they do then?
And there's this angle with Russia, of course.
Yeah, very quickly, because you mentioned meddling. Is this meddling as well by the EU?
But what I think is... The state of the opposition in Venezuela is also pretty disorganized. And I think that the emergence of Guaido changes the game. And in this respect, I think that the EU, this was not uncoordinated. And the EU and countries like Spain, for instance, have taken a very important lead in this process. And we want to keep it political and not to give rise to a
last
I think this is an opportunity for Russia to win some friends instead of creating more chaos where it doesn't really get a tangible benefit at the end. Russia should be on the side of Europe to manage the situation.
It seems now when it comes to Venezuela, so many countries are interested in what lies ahead for Venezuela.